Okay, so I want to talk about a couple of mix options for LV1 Classic. So you can see here on my table, I have an additional network switch. So this is actually a Wi-Fi router. So I have this as a sort of separate network from SoundGrid. This is just a router that's kind of connected to the console. And my devices, I have a phone here and an iPad here, who are both connected to that Wi-Fi network. So now I have this app called MyMon and this app called MyFOH that gives me basically remote control to control my inner mix if I'm a band member. And if I'm at front of house and I need to walk around the room to test some things, I can control the console remotely from my iPad. So you'll see on the iPad, for example, my layers, my colors, my naming, it all corresponds to exactly what's on the desk. In fact, if I move a fader on the iPad, it'll move it on the desk. So it's really a remote control for what's going on the console. So it's a great thing if you need to be mobile in your space to maybe troubleshoot something on stage, or maybe you're in a corner of the room that doesn't have great coverage. You can use the iPad to mix and maybe make some EQ changes to your system without having to be at the console. But the great thing about the MyMon app is that it gives musicians on stage a way to control their monitor mixes. We use this at my church and the band loves it, so I just wanted to demonstrate it for you today. So if I go to my monitor section, I'm going to basically make this my own. So you can see we have Mon 1 here. I'm going to rename this to be Jeff's mix. So I call it Jeff, and I bring my aux master up. And so now I can go onto my app and you can see that the phone basically has banks of 8 faders. So right now I'm looking at my first 8, and then I can just scroll through and basically change my mix based on what I need in my ears. I probably need some bass, maybe some electrics at a low level, a lot of piano, I like piano, maybe some pad, and so on, all throughout the input list. Now you'll notice that if I go to my channels, those changes that I made on mix 1 actually happened on the desk. So if I go back to my drums, you'll see all those changes that I'm making are actually happening in the console. I'm just doing it remotely from my phone. So it's a great way for musicians on stage to make quick changes on their own without having to call those changes over a talkback, especially if you're mixing monitors from front of house. It is an indispensable tool for having a band on stage being able to control their own mixes. So we've got our phone connected for our monitor mixing on stage. We've got our iPad connected for being able to walk around the room and make changes. But let's talk about the monitor setup in the first place. So if we go to a channel, we can see that if we go to the channel view, on the right-hand column, we see these aux sends. So this is our kick-in channel, and the default for all of our monitor mixes is for this to be pre-fader, which means that any processing that we're doing in our racks are going to be heard by the musicians. So our EQ and compression and all those settings are going to be what they hear in their mixes if we're mixing from front of house. So for the most part, that's what I would recommend doing. You know, leaving those settings so that the processing we're doing translates to their ears. But you may have a guitar player who doesn't want to hear your additional compression, or a singer who doesn't want to hear your additional EQ. So in order to make those changes, you can make those changes channel by channel. For example, if we go to our bass DI, our bass player may not want to have everything pre-fader, or in this case, post-pan. In other words, the whole, any change that we make would be going to his ears. So we just click that button and now it turns to input. Or we could click pre-fader or post-fader or post-pan. So basically the degree of the processing that the player wants to hear can be changed with the push of a button. I would normally leave all my inputs at pre-fader, but that's just me. But then you can also make that change globally. So if we go to our monitor page, above each mix, there's a drop down. So for Jeff's mix, if he didn't want to hear any of my processing, I could just hit the drop down and say change all sources. And now if I wanted to just come straight off the input, I could hit input, and now all of my sources for mix 1 are straight off the stage rack or the I/O. If I wanted it to be pre-fader, I can just change it all there. If I wanted it to be, for some reason, if I wanted it to be post-fader, I could do it there. So you may have auxes that are sending somewhere that aren't going to the player's ears on stage. It might be you're using an aux to send to a lobby feed or some other destination. So in that case, you might want all of your sources to be post-pan so that any change you make in the console is copied to that mix and going out to that destination. But for me, generally, I'm going to keep it pre-fader. If I'm doing anything that's over processing the channel that they really hear, then that might be a conversation about my processing that I would need to have with the band to go, hey man, that just feels really over compressed in the ears. Can we make sure it's not too compressed for the PA? So again, it's about the relationship between you and the band on stage. But again, this is a highly flexible, highly capable system. So you can get your auxes dialed in exactly right, either channel by channel or globally with this drop-down menu. But either way, I hope it's super helpful and a great way for you to create really impactful mixes for your musicians, because if their ears are right and if they get things dialed in, I guarantee you they're going to play better, they're going to communicate better, the songs are going to be communicated better to you at the console and through the PA to the people in the seats, and that is what it's all about.